Hey guys, so for my book review, I read the book Militainment Inc. War, Media, and Popular Culture by Roger Stahl. Stahl's purpose of writing this book is to explain how, in the past 3 decades, the military industrial complex has attempted to turn war into an interactive experience for audiences. The term militainment, which blends the two terms military and entertainment, is defined as the way that state violence is turned into an object of pleasurable consumption. The book starts out by explaining how traditionally, militainment could be described as the spectacle of war, meaning that the general public would consume war through the lens of a spectator. They would see what the military would release about the war through footage and propaganda. However, Stahl argues that starting in 1991 with the Gulf War, the United States changed the rhetoric around war to make it more interactive with citizens. Chapter 1 explains this by explaining how the citizen changed from the citizen spectator to the virtual citizen soldier. The citizen spectator materialized through the changing relationship between the Pentagon and the media during the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was the first war that U.S. citizens could watch every night from their living rooms. Originally, the citizen spectator worked out in the Pentagon's favor as the public had become desensitized to war as they watched it every night. However, this plan backfired as the brutalities of war shown on television led to a large amount of the country to disapprove of the war. As the Pentagon found that broadcasting the Vietnam War caused dissent, they experimented with a media blackout of the war during the Persian Gulf War. Unsurprisingly, this made citizens and news outlets even angrier, as they had a right to know what was going on. The Pentagon finally decided that the best way to allow the populace to consume war was through the integration of the military into the media through public relations. The terrorist attacks on September 11th and George Bush's war on terror that followed marked this transition. As citizens were constantly under the threat of war through terrorist attacks, they involuntarily became an interactive participant in the war. The remaining 4 chapters of the book then describe how this transition evolved throughout American popular culture. Chapter 2 explains how sports culture became intertwined with the military in the United States. First, as America got ready for another invasion in Iraq, the 2003 Super Bowl was covered by ABC and a Navy destroyer while fighter jets flew over. This marked the start of a deep connection between football and the military. Football commentators began to use military terms while describing plays, and conversely, military personnel began to integrate football terms into their vernacular. The Pentagon also related the military to sports with the rise of extreme sports in America. They began releasing advertisements that portrayed soldiers in the military partaking in various extreme sports, such as parachuting, skydiving, and rock climbing. The third chapter of the book explores how the Pentagon penetrated the television and film industry through investing heavily in reality TV shows and war movies. Through reality shows like War Games and movies such as Saving Private Ryan, the military became more relatable to the general populace. The fourth chapter explains the connection between the military and video games. Starting in the early 2000s, video games began to allow players to more accurately experience virtual warfare, while the military also began to create war simulators for soldiers and the general public. Stahl explains that this was done to recruit more people into the military and turn war into a more pleasurable experience. The fifth chapter of the book talks about toys and their relationship to the military. The Pentagon created their own war action figures targeted at children to encourage children to think of the war as play. Various companies then followed suit by creating their own war toys, as it was extremely profitable. The sixth and final chapter simply summarizes the book in several concluding paragraphs and includes the large bibliography for Stahl's references. Stahl uses the rhetorical critical lens when examining the interconnection between the military and entertainment. In Chapter 1, he explains how the military uses 3 different types of rhetoric to build support for wars and link war with entertainment. The first type is clean war. Clean war explains how the Pentagon will present the war in a way that does not depict death or brutality. For example, in Operation Desert Storm, the military changed its lexicon by calling bombing raids campaigns, dead citizens as collateral damage, and dead soldiers as the fallen. The second type of rhetoric was techno-fetishism. Techno-fetishism is the way that the media expresses the war in terms of the divine right of high-tech civilization to defeat low-tech barbarianism. The media would show how the US was in the right as they had high-tech equipment, while the enemy was in the wrong with their low-tech gear. The third rhetoric the Pentagon utilized was phrased, "support the troops." The idea of support the troops worked by painting someone who is anti-war as against the common US troop. So when people criticized the United States going to war, the support the troops agenda worked by making it seem like people were actually criticizing the soldiers. A way the military used rhetoric in the media to make war more interactive was through camera angles. By using war footage from cameras mounted on guns, the viewer identifies as the operator of the gun, and the war then becomes more interactive. In Chapter 2, Stahl uses the rhetorical lens to explain the connection between American sports and the military. He notes how starting during the Gulf War, journalists covering the war would use narration styles that are typically used by football commentators. This can be seen as war footage would have play-by-plays, instant replays, and expert commentary from military experts. By changing the rhetoric of war to make it seem like a sport, the war then becomes a legitimate means to resolve conflict, through two sides fighting fairly and with rules, instead of the true brutality and horror that actually is war. In the third chapter, Stahl rhetorically analyzes the change in the form of war movies during the late 90s and early 2000s. War movies such as Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down, and Behind Enemy Lines all were created with the similar form of rescuing soldiers from the enemy. This narrative made war seem like the moral act of saving people instead of violence. These films also focused on the drama between main characters, thus making war more personal and interactive. Stahl rhetorically analyzes war video games in Chapter 4. He mentions how video games have become incredibly realistic towards actual war, such as Call of Duty's Modern Warfare depicting a view of the AC-130 bomber that was so realistic it was actually hard to tell it wasn't a video game. The United States Army has also created its own video game known as America's Army, which is used to recruit potential soldiers. These two examples show how the military has tried to blur the lines between pleasure, through video games, and war. Stahl's main rhetorical argument throughout the book is that the military has changed the rhetoric of war through multiple entertainment mediums in order to make war more interactive and pleasurable. A strength I found in this book was Stahl's use of references as evidence. There are hundreds of examples and sources used throughout the book, and there isn't a single page of the book that doesn't contain sources. This helps Stahl to create a stronger argument. Another similar strength this book has is its use of illustrations. Stahl includes pictures of advertisements, books, video games, and all sorts of media to help the reader gain a better understanding of the concepts and evidence he talks about. One weakness or area of improvement I found in Stahl's writing was that he would often go on tangents that seemed off topic to the book's argument. For example, he would bring up pieces of media that were interesting, but it did not exactly support his argument. I think that he could have cut out some of these references, as they did not help the overall cohesiveness of the book. Overall, however, I found the book to be very entertaining to read, and I would recommend it to anyone looking for a good example of rhetorical analysis. Thank you.